Thanks, Yvonne. And thanks also to Sheelagh, I should say, for doing a fantastic job on pulling the presentation together. So we're going to jump straight into the next area, which is on lifelong learning and the competency framework. Now, lifelong learning, as Yvonne has mentioned, has been a key area of strategic focus for the Society over several years. And one of our key objectives in the most recent 3-year strategy plan was to establish a competency framework for actuaries that defines the range of technical and non-technical skills and competencies that might be required for various roles. And you'll probably have noticed there is a full session on this in the afternoon, but we felt, there's a lot of work gone into this. It's a very important initiative, so we thought we'd give it some time at the plenary session when we have all the members here as well. So I'm going to hand over to Sheelagh Malin. Sheelagh is a member of council and I'm delighted to say is also taking on the role of vice president of the society next month, so congratulations on that, Sheelagh. But it's in her role as chair of the Lifelong Learning Committee that she's here this morning. So I'll hand over to Sheelagh to tell you a little bit more about the competency framework.
Okay, hello everybody. As Maurice has alluded to, and as you saw a sneak preview there in the slideshow of the new competency framework for members of the Society of Actuaries in Ireland, and I'm delighted to be here today to introduce you to it. So, as was alluded to earlier, this was an objective that was set as part of the strategy for the period 2017 to 2020. So I'm going to cover what that objective was, the criteria that were set at the start of that development in terms of what we wanted it to achieve. I'll introduce you to the competency wheel and the descriptions, and I'll follow up then a little bit on what we hope the competency framework will actually be used for. So this was the objective that was set as part of the strategy, to establish a competency framework for actuaries that defines the range of technical and non-technical skills or competencies typically required for various roles. Owen Hock, who's a member of the Lifelong Learning Committee, led a working party to do this work, and that commenced in September of 2017. We did provide updates to Council as the framework developed, and then in the first half of the year we have consulted with a number of committees on the framework itself, and we took feedback on board. So this slide lists the criteria for the development. I thought it was important that we'd all be clear in what the objectives were. We wanted it to have a simple and logical structure, easy for both actuaries and non-actuaries to understand. We felt that was important, that the language needed to be as simple as possible. We wanted it to be sufficiently comprehensive that it could be used by all society members, regardless of their role, the industry they're working in, and to include students within it as well. We wanted the framework really to promote a broad approach to lifelong learning, and this is one of the key uses of the framework, to articulate the range of skills that are typically relevant to actuarial roles, and encourage actuaries to think about these in their entirety when considering their own training and development needs. Linked with that, we thought the framework might facilitate badging of CPD events. We'll be looking at that now the framework is being launched. And we thought it might be a useful reference for employers and managers. We do recognize many companies have their own internal competency framework, and that may be used to support companies' recruitment, development and promotion decisions. But we felt that a framework focused on the actuarial skill set might complement this and would also be useful for those employers without their own framework. And finally, we thought that the framework would support the society in promoting the actuarial profession and in highlighting the potential breadth and depth of the actuarial skill set. So now I'm going to introduce you to the Competency Wheel, and you'll see that within the wheel there are 3 sections denoted by different color coding, and these are skills, attributes, and knowledge. And each of these sections has 5 segments, so there are 15 competencies in all. And I think everybody, when they saw the wheel presented, I mean, some of the elements of the segments have changed a little over the last year or so of its development, but everybody was delighted that it was kind of uniform and 5 segments within, that seemed to tick one box anyway. And I'd just like to dwell on those 3 color-coded sections because I think they do tie very neatly in with one part of the Society's mission statement, which is to support actuaries throughout their career so they have the skills, attributes, and knowledge appropriate to both current and future needs of actuarial practice. So moving on then to the individual competencies and their definitions, the next 3 tables will outline those. I'm not going to read through them in the interest of time, but within the skills table here, we have data analysis, modeling, solution design, communication, and risk management. And I think we'd all recognize these as the tools of our trade and ones that have multiple applications across a range of functions and industries. Moving on to the attributes, they are accountability, collaboration, resilience, judgment, and professionalism. And just to take one example, I suppose collaboration is defined as the ability to work with others for the successful delivery of shared objectives. And as actuaries, I think our potential will be constrained if we don't fully develop this competency. And within that, it includes everything from teamwork and inclusiveness through to relationship management and people management and motivation and influencing and leadership skills. So if we move on then to knowledge, the knowledge sector of the wheel, and within that the competencies are industry issues, regulatory matters, actuarial standards, commercial awareness, and functional expertise. And just again to touch on functional expertise, that's defined as the knowledge of the functional requirements for the individual's job area. So as with all aspects of the framework, this depends directly on the role that you have and the function you perform or are a part of, whether that's in more traditional sectors, product pricing for insurance, in reserving, in customer operations, aircraft leasing, or just a general management position. So that completes, I guess, the introduction to the wheel and the list of competencies. And I hope from what I've shown you, you can see that the framework is sufficiently generic that it can be applied to any role. So moving on, there is more to the framework than just the wheel and those definitions. And this word cloud captures most of the content of the more detailed tables that comprise the framework. So for each competency, there's a table that lists several activities or behaviors that are intended to comprise that competency. And these range from foundational competencies that a member would often acquire early in their career to the higher end of the spectrum, where the skills, knowledge, and attributes are typically acquired through sustained focus over a number of years. So there is quite a lot to digest if you choose to engage in the totality of the framework. But what's it all for? A lot of words. Firstly, to support society members in the identification of their learning and development needs. So as an example, to do this, you would effectively carry out a detailed review of your own competency levels compared with those that might be envisaged for a specific role. And there's a number of scenarios in which you could do this. You might be just looking at your current role, trying to improve your effectiveness. You may be hoping to get promoted, next step on the career ladder, and be thinking about what you need to do to achieve that promotion. Or you might be considering a complete change of role or a change of industry. So you might consider, what competencies will I need to make that change successfully? So you can do this exercise, I guess, through self-assessment with a manager or a mentor, and ultimately it would identify the key gaps and how these might be addressed, for example, through a series of SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Moving on to the second purpose, it's to facilitate members in identifying which parts of the CPD program are relevant. I wonder how many of us approach our CPD obligations on the basis of what's readily available and fits into our schedule, rather than what would most benefit us in our role. So by considering how you maintain or develop competencies across the full range of the wheel, you might find there are some areas that tend to get neglected. And we do recognize that the society has a comprehensive CPD program, but it doesn't cover all the competencies in the wheel. And I guess we're not a professional training resource. We wouldn't expect to. So in light of this, it's worth considering what other sources of learning and development might be available to address this, as well as ensuring, of course, that you do utilize the Society's CPD program effectively. And then the third purpose or use of the Competency Framework is really to promote the profession to external stakeholders. We believe that the Competency Wheel, with its equal weight given to skills, attributes, and knowledge, sends a powerful message that actuaries have more to offer than just clever number crunching, and that their competencies have wide application beyond the more traditional industry sectors. So by presenting the Competency Wheel on our website and in other publications, we intend to reinforce the Society's commitment to supporting the development of its members so that they can expand their potential and thrive. So what happens next? There is another session later in the day at which we will go into a little bit more detail on the framework and the feedback we've had to date. The Society's website will be updated with information on the wheel and the supporting information on the framework in the coming weeks. The promotional career literature that the Society produces will also be updated to include the framework. And the Lifelong Learning Committee will continue to develop resources that will facilitate members engaging with the framework, particularly in the area of career progression that I described earlier. So, and we do, of course, welcome any feedback or views on the framework to the usual Society address. So that concludes my presentation. I'm not sure, Maurice, if there are questions or...
I might save them for the session in the afternoon in the interest of time. So thanks, Sheelagh. Okay.